Welcome to Flat Earth Debate Live. I'm your host, Nathan Oakley, and if you are new to this channel, or you've not done so already, then be sure to subscribe, hit the bell notification icon and join button to keep up to date with the Flat Earth Debate. If you'd like to support the channel, there is a super chat that runs alongside each of these shows while they are live. There's also a PayPal, Patreon and crypto link in the info box below the video. Most importantly, if you'd like to join the discussion, simply mute the page you are currently watching, then click the link in the info box below this video to join the panel and express your views on the nature of Earth. If you do join, please don't swear. If you do, you'll be ejected, and if you are, please don't try to rejoin the stream using sock accounts. You'll be warmly welcomed back on the next stream. Please also share the show on social media. Sharing the show obviously increases the live audience, but this in turn increases the chances of a more diverse panel, so please share the show. One last time, if you're new to the channel or you've not done so already, then be sure to subscribe, hit the bell notification icon and join button to become a Nathan Oakley 1980 channel member and keep up to date with the Flat Earth Debate. Now, we are joined by 10th Man, Sleeping Warrior, Paul Hall, Flatsoid, Chocolate Saiyan, Brian, Arwin, and a whole bunch of people in Discord. So welcome, one and all.
Hey, good Tuesday.
Yo, yo.
Ching chong.
Ching chong.
Ching chong. What the hell? The South African's going to have to explain himself on that one.
Meow ma.
I'm going to have to brush up on my Mandarin. Hello, everyone in Discord.
Good morning. I spent an hour trying to get Google Hangouts and I don't know how to freaking do it.
Well, we're live now, so let's not concern ourselves with the administration. Any evidence of...
Hello, hello.
Well, hello. Any more hellos? Well, good to have you, everybody. Any signs of a physical geometric sphere-edge horizon, formerly known as the curve of the Earth?
Not from
Google
China.
Hangouts.
Nathan, you wouldn't be expected to see the physical edge of the Earth because it's subject to refraction.
Their refraction's based on
recorded?
their refraction's based on the R value, though, isn't it? Terrestrial refraction in the geometry of Earth curve. There.
I so expected you to say we're not going through this again now because it took the whole show the other day.
I have no issue whatsoever. Always going through this, no problem. I didn't expect to be 9 months into the Black Swan argument, still explaining that their geometry asserts a physical geometric sphere edge to block boats and buildings, and their refraction requires a derivative R value based 7/6R terrestrial refraction, which requires a physical tangent point to the horizon, which they now deny us being able to see. I'm more than content to summarise that every show.
Actually, Nathan, I'm going to call you there on a lie. I know damn well that you said that it was going to take the ballers at least 12 months to get their head around this. And we're at 9 months now. So I'm going to call you a liar because we knew absolutely that the Baltards would be not even with this conversation for ages. So I demand that you take that back.
You sure? I gave it that longer a time frame?
I called 14, though.
All right, it might have been longer, but it was at least 12.
I will concede that we upped the amount of time upon discussion. But initially, I was like, oh, yeah, they'll get this quickly. And I said to Spurs, I remember distinctly saying to Spurs, yeah, initially, I thought they'd get it quickly. And now, laughably, you're saying, oh, yeah, they'll get this quickly enough, won't they? Spurs was wrong. I was wrong. That I won't deny. But I certainly thought they'd get it quicker than they have.
I've still held
guys
up
like
because I called 14 months.
I heard guys like Ed Freeze, you're going to think he's going to get it quicker. No, I don't. They're stupid. But go ahead, Chocolate. I didn't hear what you said.
I said, so far I've held up because I called 14 months before they understand it. So a year and change.
What we should do is we should change the question slightly. We should say, instead of saying how long will it take for the ballers, we should ask how long will it take for Dawn Treader to get it? That's the measurement.
24 months.
Agreed.
Shout out to Alexander for the super chat. Can I just do a quick sound check with Arwin?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, we hear you. Cool.
Okay.
Any signs of...
I wanted to ask Tony. He brought forth this terrestrial refraction, right? So how was this established exactly?
I don't know, some bloke, Al Baruni on a mountain measuring the dip angle. Not the horizon, the dip angle.
So
dip angle
how does that
hold
establish
on.
terrestrial refraction?
Dip angle to what?
Well, that would be a straight line, Nathan.
An apparent position.
That would be a tangent touching the surface of a sphere.
And what's that represented in the frame of his view?
That would be a dip, Nathan. Are you stupid?
A dip to what? Yeah, you're very good at this, Anthony. I've got to admit.
An apparent position called the horizon.
No,
Anthony, hold on.
it's-
Anthony just said it wasn't the horizon, though. That was his specific, detailed declaration, was it not, Anthony?
Yeah, it was the edge of the sphere, Nathan.
You said he's measuring the dip, not the horizon. Now we're establishing what the dip to what is, and it is the horizon. This seems like a lie.
Nathan, it's just the edge where the sphere meets. But because you're higher and you're out of all that dirty air, it means that you can see further. And that dip represents the sphere edge, Nathan. It's a tangent, you moron.
So even if I let you assume this tangent, you're saying you're measuring a tangent, therefore assuming that there's a sphere edge beneath that line that you're drawing to this not horizon position that represents this tangent point when you assume a sphere, correct?
Well, of course it's a sphere, Nathan. Everybody knows it's a sphere. So
you're assuming a sphere. Yeah.
No,
Sorry.
I'm not. Everybody knows, Nathan, and it's totally reasonable for me to think this.
It's just a fallacy.
I mean, how else do you measure a radius unless you know you're measuring a radius, right?
Well, you're assuming it.
Yeah.
So, Tony, how does this establish terrestrial refraction and how it works?
It doesn't, but he's clever, isn't he, Owen? He's got right away from that.
It doesn't. Well done, Owen. You pointed out the fallacy. You're pointing out the distraction technique, the ignorance point. I mean, at the end of the day, they can't address this properly. They have to concede that the horizon is apparent, it's optical, and there is no geometricness to it. But they think that it's there. They believe that it's there. They teach children that it's there, so it's there. That's the way they see it.
Wait, is the physical ball refracting?
Well, Tony, you could have...
Because 7/6 r is the radius. So
Right.
why are they changing the value of the radius? I thought it was refraction. I thought that was the light.
Can't change
They're
the
talking
radius.
about the ball.
Their claim
Wow.
of the R value represents the physicality of their sphere. You can't change the radius. It's in their mind set in stone.
Chocolate, you just don't understand what an apparent radius is.
Oh, an effective radius?
Yeah, or an effective radius. Yeah.
Effective radius. Yeah, there you go.
If it looks too big, then
I have
it's an
something to
radius.
say.
That similar to
What's up,
pseudo
Brian?
radius?
I have something to say.
Yeah, bro.
Pray
I
silence.
just want to state for the record. I
This
just
is
want to
the right
say hello,
one.
everybody. Hello, Nathan.
Pray silence. Brian's got something to say.
I just want to state for the record, thank you, Nathan, that I said when we were speaking about how long it would take the ballers to get and understand the black swan, I said 40% of them will never get it.
Yeah, that's Dawn Feder. He takes up that
Thank
whole
you.
40%.
Can I just give you a statistic from Vic Reeves? 32.9% of all statistics are made up on the spot.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Oh,
Shouldn't we be proving that there's a ball before we're taking these radiuses and measurements?
Yeah.
That's
That'd
the-
be helpful, wouldn't it?
Yes, that's correct, Neil. That's the heart of what is known as a begging the question fallacy. If you're trying to prove that we have a spherical surface beneath your feet and you say, well, I'm going to measure a tangent to a spherical surface, that would be to assume the thing you're trying to prove now, wouldn't it?
Yeah. So what's the problem here? It's over.
No, you're great, Neil. Kiss you at the minute. Yeah, you would, under any other circumstances in debate, get to the point where you point out that they are using what's known as a begging the question fallacy, also known as circular reasoning, and that would be the end of their assertion, because they've used a logical fallacy. However, because the Western world is so indoctrinated with the idea of being on a sphere, it's not enough to debunk the logical fallacy, which is to assume one's outcome. You must then go into formulating with their assumption, which still holds true even though it's a fallacy, and debunking it with a logical consistency known as modus tollens. That's how far we have to go to debunk the zealotry of globe belief. We have to first assume in our statement, with logical consistency, that the Earth is a sphere, because they can't let it go, even though it's a fallacy, and then demonstrate why it cannot possibly be so. To the point where we take their assertion that the Earth is a sphere and make it paradoxically impossible to assert. That's how far we've had to go, because that's the level of zealotry we're dealing with when we deal with globe believers.
Wow.
I think I've discovered the root of the true problem. it was interesting over the weekend, over the Labor Day weekend here in the U.S., that there was Globers. Well, I'm not going to say who, but saying that you can't use logic when it comes to science. That logic is not valid, doesn't work.
Yeah, they need to negate the effect of dismissal by illogical fallacy, because they need to be illogically fallacious to be able to argue the shit that they do. That's why they're going to argue that point.
Well, also there's different logic for different things. So, like, you know, like God, he has his own logic, but our logic doesn't apply to him. So there's even logical inconsistency there. You know,
you've tried this back to God. I've got to stop you.
If your reason doesn't make sense.
You're using a tangent to get this to God when you've opened it up with science. Well, in science, this was discussed literally in the last Ballbusters by Quantum Eraser, and it was Adam that was discussing it back and forth with him. So shout out to Adam Meakin. Basically, you've got to have a certain degree of logic to formulate a viable hypothesis in the first instance. Now, your hypothesis being a supposition, well, you've got to have, and according to QE, you'd get better at this the more you did it in your specialist field, but you've got to have a fair idea through logic to say, I suppose this could cause that effect I've observed. And Adam was saying that's the aspect of genius. And it started off by me explaining that Dr. John Dee said actually performing the experiment itself can be quite tedious, you know, just systematic experimentation stage. And in his mind, he said, well, I don't necessarily see that as the science bit. And it's like, well, absolutely it is. It's fundamental. However, the formulation of the original supposition, which then goes on to be proven true, could be considered genius. And that would require logic. But the method doesn't. It's empirical. So it's not designed to have any logical deduction needed at the end. It's designed to establish empirically what the cause is. And once you've established it, that is the cause. It's that simple. So there's no logic required.
Yeah, the logic was used in the big... Sorry.
Yeah, exactly, Brian. The logic's used in the formulation of... Exactly, the logic supposition is where you would require it. But no, beyond that, you're just validating your supposition. Well, yeah, you might need a bit of logic to first formulate that supposition. But without the experiment, which is the actual method, well, then you haven't actually got any empiricism. You know, what they do at this stage, when they don't have any empiricism, they've got their supposition, they think they're a genius, so they then declare it with just so story, rather than validated experimentation. Anyway.
Well, all I was going to say is...
Yeah, the logic was used in the...
You keep cutting out, Brian.
I'll talk after Paul.
I don't know if you're going to drop and rejoin. You keep cutting out at the crucial moment.
Who, me or
Brian?
Brian or me?
Well, if you go, Paul, while Brian's dropping and rejoining, because it's cutting out.
Yeah, okay.
Thanks.
All I was going to say is, like, even like you're formulating your argument, even you're formulating your experiment, the law of non-contradiction is immediately implied, even the law of identity. Because if you stop and say the cause of this is this and this, but they contradict each other, that's logical inconsistency. And if you don't have everything defined properly, you could violate the law of identity. So you have to define things. So logic, even in setting up whatever you're trying to do, logic is in the beginning of it.
Correct. Hypothesis
can't go away.
Yeah, exactly. Hypothesis construction requires some logic being applied, but then you're going to go forth with the actual method of validation. So go ahead, Brian.
Thanks, Nathan. I was just going to say that the logic was used in the formulation of the method itself. So you wouldn't have to use logic afterwards. It's just follow the method.
Again, correct. So the method itself, which is empirical, I'll get that in immediately, has come from philosophers and from logic to form the method that is empirical. So while it has its roots in philosophy and logic, the method itself is not logical based. It's empirically based. You are establishing cause by varying and manipulating an assumption of something you think causes it. And if you get it right, you validate your hypothesis. The alternative is validated, the null is invalidated, and you've established the cause of the effect empirically. So there's no logical inference required at the end of systematic experimentation. You've established it, or you haven't. You validate your null if it doesn't cause the effect. So hence, you're both right. You know, you've got to have a certain degree of logic to formulate a hypothesis, but then you're going to be testing it to see if it's right or not. And no matter how genius you are with your, it could be this, it could be wrong, and you're going to find out when you test it. But that method itself has come from philosophers. Doesn't mean it's logically based, though. Correct, Brian?
Nathan, one of the chief principles to logic is the law of non-contradiction. So when you think about that and how they, and Anthony brought it up earlier, how they confuse a force with an effect, they're already violating logic there.
Law of non-contradiction.
They don't confuse. They deliberately conflate to make it confusing so that others can think that they can do that. But that's essentially the same as saying that my car's really fast and then you're describing it as being slow. If you say fast, it means fast, right? It does not mean slow. But if you conflate fast and slow and it makes it sound like they're the same thing, then the audience is confused because you don't know whether your car's fast or slow. But if you conflate in those two terms, then gravity then becomes a force and an effect all in one go, which it clearly is not. It's defined, and an effect is the last.
Well, every effect has an antecedent, a cause.
Yes, and there are multiple causes. There is only ever one effect, and it's right at the very end. If the effect is causing something else, it's not an effect. It's a consequential cause in a chain of causation, and the overall effect is the thing right at the very end. And guess what? Einstein said that's what gravity is, right at the very end.
So there's an example of that.
That's why
That's
why they don't like definitions.
Exactly. They don't like, because they call it semantics, and they say that's a Nathan Oakley argument or a quantum eraser argument, and actually ignore the fact that it's a valid argument and try and personalize it so that they can dismiss it based on the person rather than on the argument itself. Don't shoot the messenger, shoot the message, because the message is strong.
Hold on just one second.
My minutia is going to be anytime somebody says that, oh, so you're the one who came up with the heliocentric model. Is that your argument? Did you create that? Because apparently you can't say or use an argument made by somebody else. Did Nathan Oakley and Quantum Eraser define gas pressure?
No.
Is that them?
I'm losing track of all these things.
Did they come up with the second law of thermodynamics? No.
Too many things for me to keep on top of. First and foremost, Sleeping Warrior. So there's an example that you gave where you would have a specific example of it with the turn of the Earth claim. So any evidence of axial rotation, they respond by convoluting axial rotation speed, which is measured in an angular speed, with actual tangential velocity. In other words, they'd make it sound slow, 15 degrees an hour, rather than 1,000 miles an hour actual speed that you're travelling at on the equator. So they just convolute it and mix those two up. So that was the first thing. Chocolate. What was the last thing you said? Because I want desperately to address that as well. What was the last thing you said? Sorry.
Well, basically, when they say, oh, this argument, you're using a Nathan Oakley quantum eraser argument, it's like, well, did they define gas pressure?
Perfect.
Were they the ones who created the second law of thermodynamics? Like, what do you mean?
Okay, whenever anybody is debating anybody, it doesn't matter what the discussion is. It doesn't also matter where you get the information from. So in the pre-show, a dude made a claim, and he didn't have anything to back his claim. Now, it doesn't matter if the original, let's say he got that information from the TV and there was a news broadcaster that broadcasted the information. It doesn't even matter what the information is. Upon parroting that information, it doesn't matter if the guy on TV didn't do any research and just made it up. The person who's actually putting the argument forward, they immediately take ownership of that argument. In other words, it becomes their argument. So it doesn't matter where the source of the argument comes. If I put forward something as an opinion or an argument, it doesn't matter what my source is. That becomes my opinion. So in the publishing world, they have this saying, publish and be damned. Does it matter that you've got it from a source that's unreliable? Can you blame the source? No. You have published. Likewise, if a tweet goes out that's scandalous in some way and you retweet it, you are publishing it. Therefore, publish and be damned, it becomes your tweet, right? People have seen this all the time. Same with an argument. So it doesn't matter who the argument came from. It matters who is voicing the argument. Now, they might choose to back their argument by citation. It still doesn't become the citation's argument, though. So if I cite Neil deGrasse Tyson in my argument, often I'll be citing him as a hostile witness anyway. So even if I went to him as a source, he's not going to make my argument for me. It's my argument. But for a globehead, if they cite Neil deGrasse Tyson and say, well, he said Earth was turning underneath the ball when it left the ground and made the goal, and I prove that person wrong in debate, I'm not defeating Neil deGrasse Tyson, who's been cited. I'm defeating the guy who's put forward the argument. It's he or she's argument upon parroting it to us. So you have to understand that it's going to be your argument. You've got to take ownership of it rather than deflect ownership onto someone else. And in rebuttal, which is Chocolate's point, stating that someone who's put forward an argument is actually putting forward mine or Quantum Eraser's argument is to belittle you as an opponent, because that's incorrect. You're putting it forward. Who cares where you got it from? You're the one voicing it. It becomes yours to back up. Likewise, if you get annihilated, I'm not there to rescue you, even though they're claiming it's my argument. Well, if they want to claim it's my argument, get on the phone to me, get me there, and I'll represent the argument, if that's what they want to say, and tell them that. Well, he's not here. I'm arguing it. You want to argue with him? Go and argue with him. He's got a show daily. So
you've been over this before.
Go on, Neil.
I said you've been over this before. I remember hearing this.
Yeah, ownership. Taking ownership of what you say, do. And this is basic stuff. You teach it to your children. Taking responsibility. Ugh. But we're dealing with morons who'll defer their failure onto their citation, or claim that the person they're debating is somehow inferior to the source of their information. And nothing could be further from the truth.
It's worth pointing out as well that when you say that you'll use somebody like Neil deGrasse Tyson, for example, as a hostile witness, there's quite a lot of people that get confused when we cite Einstein for gravity, because they think that we're pushing Einsteinian gravitation or we're pushing general relativity. We're actually using Einstein as a hostile witness, in the sense that we're using Einstein to bring the ballers up to speed with current physics, because there's no point in us reading what the current physics is and then realizing that it's a mathematical concept that they're describing with general relativity that's abstract. It's poetry, right? If the ballers are still arguing for Newtonian gravity that was superseded in World War I, World War I is a long time ago, right? That's how all this position is that they maintain and occupy. So when we cite Einstein, it's not because we're pushing general relativity. We're just trying to get the ballers into the 21st century and get them up to speed. That's all.
Yeah, they don't know their own arguments, so we have to point out their own rhetoric. But as we point out how Einstein superseded the Newtonian nonsense that CV boys put forward, well, when we are stating that, we'll have a baller come on the panel and go, prove that Einstein superseded. It's like, no. We're telling you what your priests document as your rhetoric. I'm not going to prove Einstein. It's nonsense. Pseudo-nonsense. I'm defeating that crap. The problem is that you're not parroting it, even though it's your rhetoric. You're parroting something 105 years out of date. Hence, when Anthony asked on the pre-show, I didn't get to answer you, Anthony, what's up and what's new? Well, the biggest turn of events is actually you're involved, and you went over it of your own volition in the pre-show. We've drawn a line in the sand. Yeah? 100 years wasn't enough. You know what I mean? No, sorry, mass attracting mass. Your Cavendish bullshit ends here. We've had enough of it. It's 105 years out of date.
Let me just elaborate on that point. I did it in the pre-show. You're right to demand that they can't cite Newtonian principles anymore. We've got to push it that one step further and get them to define what the current definition of gravity is. Chocolate alludes to it all the time by simply saying, what's gravity? Well, you've got to ask them, what is gravity? And every time you ask them what gravity is, whatever answer they give is always something other than the definition. Always. Because they'll never cite it, because the minute they say that it's an effect of the curvature of space-time, it is over at that point. But they'll never give the definition. So that what they'll do is they'll give a colloquialism instead, because we all kind of know what gravity is, right? And we've all got our own understanding of how we would explain it if we had to try and explain it to somebody, regardless of whether you're applying Newtonian or Einsteinian. But when you try and get them to explain what gravity is from an Einsteinian perspective, without a definition, they start citing poetry back. So we need the definition. And when they give the definition, get them to apply it. Once they start applying it, it becomes the poetry that it actually is. Because they can't explain Newton's apple falling off the tree. We can explain it. It's just too heavy for the branch. But they've got to start talking about bending of space-time and all this nonsense, right? Conceptual poetry within mathematics that's abstract, that doesn't do anything in the real world. It just describes the real world. That's because it's abstract. Once they've defined it and then start applying it, listen to how they get themselves tied up in nonsense, because they can't explain basic stuff that we can. It's beautiful.
Any scientific evidence of gravity?
On this one, if I could tie it to the last one, I'm sending you a pic right now, Master B. Chocolate put out a video yesterday. Chocolate, remember that one you put out from that Jana lady?
Yeah.
Nathan, if you can just show the screenshot of it. So I watched this, and she goes through different groups of people. It says there, a child, a teen, a college student, a grad student, and an expert. It is so amazing how much begging the question there is here. And at the end, when she's with the expert, who's actually teaching this stuff to everybody, really high level expert, not the PhD grad student, but even higher than that, they were now saying, well, based on current understanding, everything we know about gravity could be false. But if you start the video, they're showing gravity to be true, but at the end, when they get to the expert, it's the opposite. It's just amazing. Did you see that, Chocolate?
You know, I couldn't even make it to the end because there was so much begging the question nonsense in it that I had to pause it and come back to it later, and I forgot to. So I didn't even watch. I saw the first half of it when they were talking to the kid and the teenager, and it's like, look at the indoctrination.
Yeah.
Like, all the little stories that you've heard, like all the little arguments that these guys come here with, you heard all of them in one video. It's hilarious to me.
But when you get to the end of the video, they're basically saying Einstein superseded, and now there's something else that might even make him wrong a little bit. They don't know.
Can I just point out that if you get to the point, like, obviously Chocolate is that he feels that disdain when he's watching them and the preaching, that verbal diarrhea, the way that Rumpus does, the way that they all do in here, right? If you can genuinely sit back and watch any of these pro-science, like popular science videos, if you feel that disdain because you see the alarm bells ringing because you've learned it, because this is what the ballers do, and you end up not being able to even watch it, then you'll understand why it is that talking to these baltards really is a waste of time, because they do it. It's so obvious. We spot it a mile away now, but they don't even realize they're doing it because the conversational skills is zero. They don't listen. They deny everything, and they preach their mantra as though it's a cult. And it is a cult. Heliocentrism is a cult. They can't think critically. They all believe the narrative. They get told the same story. And so long as they parrot that story in unison and they're all on the same page, then they're all together because they live in that comfortable lie. But if you watch them videos and feel that disdain when you're watching it because of all the logical, fallacious arguments that they present, then you know that you're an expert flat earther, because all of their arguments are the same. Fallacious.
It gave me a headache.
It's
horrible. So bad.
Can I just read the comments underneath it, or the description that they've put on this Wired video? Astrophysicist Jenna Levin, PhD, is asked to explain the concept of gravity to 5 different people. I wonder how different they are. A child, okay, a teen, so a child, a college student, kind of a child, a grad student, grown-up child, and an expert. Very diverse group of people she's talking to. Nevertheless, she's explaining what now? The concept? What's a concept? Is it a physical, real thing?
Interesting that all of the arguments that the ballers in this topic, grown adults that claim to be authorities in the topic like Rumpus, when they start talking about Newtonian gravitation, that was what the first person did. The child, the 5-year-old child, talking about a force pulling towards the center of the earth. Well, that's what the babies were doing in that video.
Exactly.
Hold on a second, because I was thinking about this yesterday. They went from teaching you 1 + 1, 3-letter words, dog, cat, rat. And oh, by the way, here's where you live, and this is the solar system.
Good point. Yeah. There's actually a guy. In Britain who's a PhD, and he's going around to little primary schools. You know, young kids, right? He's going in and he's teaching them Einsteinian gravity. He's teaching them about the theory of general relativity. He says because he can't understand why people who are even in university are still being taught Newtonian when it's out of date. It's over. And this is a guy I read about online, and I got one of the clearest explanations of Einsteinian gravity, and some of the explanations about understanding of the theory of general relativity of what they think it is. Like from this guy, like he's going around, he's actually on a crusade, like because he sees how nonsense it is. But even at that, I know he's wrong. But the point is that at least he's more right than the rest of the idiots we deal with.
Can you imagine that being a really exciting class? Okay, kids, today we're going to learn about bending geodesics in space-time. Hooray! Hey, Tommy, can you say pseudo-Riemannian for space?
So
Gotta get them when they're young.
But one second, Ted. Sorry, just want to say what Neil said. If you think about what Neil said about them teaching him how to say cat and dog and how to spell them 3-letter words and 1 + 1 is 2. Now you have a guy who's going in teaching him about Einstein at that age. Go on, sorry, Ted.
Yeah, I was going to say, when I watched the video, I had to go back because there's so many begging the question and little things that were being said.
I told you.
And so at the 14, I mean, there was stuff before this, but here's just 3 things I marked on the video. On the 14-minute, 19-second mark, she said it's a thought experiment. At the 15-minute, 18-second mark, they were talking about
Have you got the link? Let's play these.
Zero gravity.
Hold on, 10th. Let's do this properly. Have you got a link to it? You can critique it as I play it. I don't mind playing it if you're literally going to be critiquing it.
Okay. Let me get the link and I'll send it to you, and then I'll go on these 3 marks when you tell me. I'll be right back.
Brilliant.
I don't even think they know themselves what they're telling us.
Glad you got that right, Nathan.
What, sorry?
I'm glad you got this song right. I remember the guy correcting you on that.
Yeah, that was Dave.
Okay, it's a masterpiece.
There's three guys that I was dealing with. Well, I put a comment on Nathan's video that you brought out from the 24/7 the other day, and I put a comment underneath that. And 3, maybe 4 people that have been on that have been arguing with me that little g is not a calculation. It's like they won't even accept that little g, even though it's out of date. Like, never mind it being out of date, they won't even accept that it's not a calculation. That's who you're dealing with.
What do they think it is?
They think it's a measurement, an actual real life measurement, a real thing. Yeah.
Okay, so what type of measuring device are they using to measure it?
No, well, like they asked the little girl in that
Maths.
video, right?
This fella sent me a video.
Maths, you say? Well, then it's not measuring, is it? Then it's calculation.
Well,
Yeah,
like
that
they
is
asked
measuring.
the little girl in that video.
What are you talking about? What's
Take
going on?
these-
Yeah, maths
these
is
two
measuring. Measuring is maths. Why are you contesting this? I don't understand what's going on.
Really? Maths? Measuring?
But
Yeah.
it's not the definition of measure is to use standard units like liters, feet, miles, kilometers, that kind of thing. Ounces, that's standard units, physical measurement. Whereas calculation is anything that isn't physical measurement. That's the difference. So measurement is not calculation. They're 2 different things.
Qualification through an abstract description of how much you've got of something. That's still abstract. Sorry.
Yeah, but then you already started out with how much you have of something.
What, an abstract concept? That's my point. This is still maths. Sorry. Anyway, can we move on? I've got this up now for 10th man. Can we get some timestamps?
Yeah, 14-minute, 19-second mark. very short part. It says thought experiment.
14 minutes and what?
19 seconds.
Those aren't gravitational objects. And so he wanted to eliminate.
There were some photos posted on.
Don't you just love it? As soon as you start playing, get an ad.
And one way to do the thought experiment is to imagine standing in an elevator that you can't. Was what Einstein described as the happiest thought of his life. So right now, you might feel heavy in your chair, and we might feel heavy on the floor in our feet, or standing in an elevator cab. And Einstein would have said, well, what does the chair have to do with it? Or the floor, or the elevator? Those aren't gravitational objects. And so he wanted to eliminate them. And one way to do the thought experiment is to imagine standing in an elevator.
That's good.
Okay.
Second one.
What's a gravitational object?
well, you got to realize she's talking about gravity as a real thing, and then she starts referring to it as a thought experiment.
Yeah, it's doublespeak. Gravity is not a real thing. Let's talk about it in the abstract world of thought experimentation. Now imagine this scenario.
I wanted to hear what happened in that elevator.
Do you now? Well, we're moving on because I don't want to get a copyright strike.
Second one, 15-minute, 18-second mark. She makes a correlation with what the zero-G plane does and the ISS. I found it very interesting.
I knew you would like that.
The plane and then just free falling. The plane just drops out of the air. And while it's falling, they will float weightlessly. And there's been a lot of experiments about it, but you don't.
Not experiments. Using magic words. What a shock. Is that the bit you wanted?
It was just before that where she's saying just like the ISS, meaning that what's happening in the zero-G plane is just like what you see in the ISS. So it's like exactly what we've been saying.
Yeah, she basically says you can make it look like people are floating in the ISS when you're in a plane and you do a certain maneuver, and you can make it look just like that. She just says it very nonchalant.
Well, yeah, their assertion is begging the question fallacy known as the word orbit. So their assumption, or their declaration about a light in the sky they call the ISS, is that it's falling around the presupposed spherical surface, continuously falling. So therefore they're recreating it with this falling aeroplane and saying it's the same effect. Well, that's to beg the question that you've got these bodies falling around spherical Earth. Begging the question fallacy they call orbits. Moving on. Yep. What's the next one?
Last one, but there's plenty more if you go to the video. Last one is 15-minute, 44-second mark. It goes to 16-minute, 56 mark. Mathematics and calculations, not science.
You say 1544?
Starts there, but it ends in context at 1656, where it's mathematics and calculations versus science.
Do I need to play it separately? Is that an entire minute chunk that you want me to play?
That's the chunk, but you don't have to play it all if you feel it's going to be a copyright.
Yeah, probably will. I'll give it a 20-second stops.
Let's trace. So if you were floating in empty space, really empty space, and you had an apple and you threw the apple, what shape do you think it would chase?
So let's assume that space is real. Let's assume there's a sky vacuum and you're in it throwing apples around. What? Yeah, no, we don't beg the question that there's this fanciful place called space. It violates natural law. Did you want me to take it to a different bit contextually, 10th, or is that it?
No, just keep going. Just skip a little bit, scrub it. Like.
Well, if I threw it straight, I would think it would go straight.
Yeah, it would just go straight. But if you did that on the Earth, what would happen?
So again, it's just separating out this fake region that violates natural law from Earth and space. Well, they're separate places with the gas not filling the one that you claim is real, where you've just thrown this apple in your thought experiment. Yeah, you're not going to go to space, are you, love? Look at her eyes. You're looking up at the sky, but you're never going to go to the sky vacuum because it's not real.
It would just go down.
Yeah, but it would chase a curve.
Oh, yeah.
It would chase an arc.
Yeah.
It's going to fall in an orbit.
And the faster you throw it, the kind of longer the arc.
Oh, really? Says who? And eventually it'll fall around Earth indefinitely in this presupposition of an orbit around a spherical Earth. Yeah. Pretty much just like I described.
So the second step to thinking about curved space-time is to
thinking about it? How about you show it us? Oh, it's just a thought experiment. It's just conceptual. Go on, 10th.
No, it gets better.
Thinking about space-time, which is already a concept. So she's thinking about a concept. Nice.
say that when things fall freely around a body like the Earth, they trace curved paths, as though space itself, was curved.
Well, when you throw a football,
Wow.
when the quarterbacks launch a bomb, they call it a bomb. It does arc. It goes up and it arcs and it comes down.
Yeah, what she's asserting, though, is not that. She's asserting that you launch something with enough force and it will find itself in a perpetually falling trajectory known as an orbit. Now, she's not asking this lady, she's telling her. That's what it'll do. She corrected her, right? No, it won't just go down. It'll eventually go in this curved path following a geodetic in space-time. Nod. You carry on? Any more?
And so you had that moment, I saw it on your face. You went, oh. So that's the intuition. That's how Einstein gets from thinking that space-time is curved, from the idea that, well, there's this field that permeates all of space, and what it's really describing is the curves that things fall along.
This idea, he went from this idea to it being a thing, and all it took was me to nod along, telling you it was so, and then getting you to agree that it is so. And that's how we went from Einstein's musings to us believing we're in a sky vacuum. Isn't it amazing? Chuckle. Any more?
And she said intuition several times about Einstein. So it's his imagination.
That's how I felt watching this. I felt gross.
Okay, I think we've had enough of that. Thank you for sharing it, though.
So are we still on the gravity question, Nathan?
Yeah,
I feel
technically, yeah.
violated.
Yes, we are, technically speaking.
Is there anybody out there that can actually argue this emergent force argument that Fight the Fat Tight Shirt keeps talking about? Because I really want to go through that with somebody that's got some ounce of intelligence, because he's clearly read a particular perspective from somebody in current physics, but he hasn't read it very well, because if he reads it and understands what he's actually reading, he'll understand that the emergent force that he describes is not actually helping him, because he sees the word force. He thinks that means, yeah, it's a force then. He doesn't understand the reasoning behind why he describes it as an emergent force. We do see another...
Tropic gravity.
Yeah. We do see another emergent force. Like with my egg, I emerged a force. What?
So the word force is used colloquially then.
Yes.
He said it, though. Fight the Flat Earth said it. When I asked him what is gravity and how is gravity a force, he said it. He said when we use the word gravity, we use it colloquially because it creates the force that we call gravity.
Yeah, but he's also using colloquially the use of the word force, because force is defined in physics, isn't it? And what he's using is a description, an adjective of a movement, rather than the name of it, the noun. Because when you give something the name force, that's defined. It's a push or a pull, isn't it? In physics, not saying it's. I don't want to go into the push or pull bit. I just want to point out that the definition there that applies. An interaction, right? It's a physical interaction between something and something else. But because he's using it colloquially, he doesn't have to adhere to the meaning of the word force because it's very convenient. But because he hasn't read and understood the article from the writer, he thinks that because it says force, that means that it's a force. But the problem he's got is when you actually read what he's describing in this context, assuming that he's got I'm talking about the correct citation, which I've not heard him argue yet. The emergent properties of this force that he's arguing is my egg. When I added mass and that changed the relative density of the medium relative to the egg, we see an emergent force happening. We would call that entropy, pressure going to non-pressure. But because they want to redefine that and say it's an emergent force, then they've got a force, but it's actually pressure going to non-pressure, and we're seeing that balance being found in nature because we call it relative density disequilibrium, finding its equilibrium. We see that, but because he's called it an emergent force, which we would call entropy, a law of nature, he then thinks he's got a force again, and he thinks it's all okay, but he doesn't understand what the context in which that description is being described as, and he's just a little bit retarded. So if there's anybody out there that can legitimately have that conversation, let's have it sometime.
Okay, so what he was basically saying is
gravity,
non-force causes entropy.
He's describing pressure going to non-pressure as a force because he sees the acceleration. So, like, imagine that you see a balloon bursting, and
you're missing the whole argument.
If you imagine,
You're missing the whole argument, Anthony.
Hold on,
What?
Brian. The guy, is it Zalti? Did you want to add something? Oh, you've got your mic wide open.
Mike discipline.
Stick him on mute. Sorry, Brian. Go ahead.
Anthony, thanks, Nathan. Anthony, you're missing the whole argument that he's making. When the guy who wrote this and Craig comes up with this emergent force nonsense, what that is a reluctance to accept the word effect. Every time they're using the word force, they're inferring a cause situation, because a force can cause things. An effect is an effect that's caused by something. So what they're doing is, if you end up in that argument with him or anyone else, then you're actually helping him beg the question of mass attracting mass, because that's because he needs and wants a force. Remember, we're throwing all that out the window.
Yeah, that's right. But what
Just saying.
The point I'm making is that he's describing when the balloon bursts and you see the pressure, you can imagine all the pressure bursting out in all directions evenly because of Pascal's law, right? Which does apply to gases, guys. You just haven't done enough reading. Read a bit further down the paragraph, and it tells you that it applies to gases. But Pascal's law states that the gas pressure is even on all sides, right? Pushing out in all directions evenly, right? So when you pop the balloon, it all pushes out evenly in all directions because pressure is a force. He's describing that pressure pushing out and the visualization in your head that you see of the gas particles bursting outwards. He's describing that as an emergent force, just ignoring the fact that it's pressure going to non-pressure, which is what should happen with the Earth's atmosphere in a vacuum of space and the model in an open model with no membrane. He's describing that action as an emergent force because he sees something moving and he needs it to be a force. So he calls it an emergent force, but he's ignoring the fact that it's pressure going to non-pressure, which is exactly what happened with the egg. So I'm looking forward to the moment when I catch up with somebody and have that conversation.
That's what he says, emergent, not entropic.
No, exactly. No, it's a second order effect of entropy. Now, I might sound smart saying that. It's not me that came up with that. It's actually with Quantum Eraser, Adam Meakin, Dr. John Dee. They thrashed it out for several days because I don't know if it was me that postulated it, but somebody put it out there and were like, it's just entropy, right? This is just entropy. No, not necessarily. It's a second order effect of entropy. However you want to interpret that. Speak to Dr. John Dee or QE. I'm not going to be able to qualify it any further than the end of the discussion. Although I was there for a lot of it.
Yeah, but the point I'm making is that he sees the pressure go into the non-pressure, and he sees the equalization of the equilibrium, that all things seem to seek equilibrium and the balancing force of nature, right? He sees that, describes it as not an entropic force, he describes it as an emergent force. But because it's got the word force at the end of it, he then thinks it's a force. And it's like, yeah, but you're ignoring the pressure that is the force that's doing the thing that you're describing and then renaming.
Mind if I just make a note from Bible Literalist? So, Paula, shout out to you. She sent a note in the side chat. It's a non-inertial reference frame on the parabolic flight. They're falling at the same speed as the jet. The floating is an illusion by restriction of the jet's interior. Just wanted to get that in because it's a nice, concise explanation for it. Thank you very much, Paula, by the way.
I'd like to add something to this. So they're saying emergent force, right, Anthony?
That's what they're using. Yeah, the site in Valinda, I believe.
Oh, okay, fine. Let's just go to their own actual statements. They say it's a pseudo force. They say it's a fictitious force. They say it's an apparent force. So they should be saying it's an emergent pseudo force. It's an emergent fictitious force. It's an emergent apparent force. They lose right there.
But it's not a force at all.
That's why it's got the word fictitious in front of it.
Remember, I told you the other day, I'm waiting for ballers to grab onto it.
It's a violation of the law of non-contradiction right there. When their own books call it fictitious force, and he wants to put emergent in front of force, he can't. He's got to put it in front of fictitious force.
I just want to hear Flatsoid again, and then I'll shout out Unicorn Laser Eyes. Go ahead, Flatsoid.
I said, I told you the other day, just waiting for Globus to jump on to this entropic gravity.
Indeed. Sorry, Anthony.
What did he say?
Just 1 second. Quick shout out to Unicorn Laser Eyes. It's on topic as well. Great. Thank you very much for the super chat. Unicorn Laser Eyes, he says, Craig, meaning Fight the Flat Earth, took Moose's advice and thinks a non-force is a force.
That's the problem. They have to conflate force and cause and effect, or force and acceleration, because if they can conflate that and confuse people, you can genuinely believe that any force or cause can be the same as any effect. But it doesn't work in real world. It only works in that one argument for gravity, right? But it confuses people. But these words have got meaning, and they mean things. When we say fast and slow, we don't mean the opposite when we say them. We say fast because it's fast, and we say slow because it's slow. We don't say up but mean down, and we don't say 100 but mean 10. We say these things as they mean something. So when it says cause or force, it doesn't mean effect. But that's what they must do. So watch for them switching and conflating the two. And the minute you see it, point it out and say you're violating the law of non-contradiction. You can't argue both positions or hold. The other one is, what's the one where you hold two positions in the law of non-contradiction? You're holding two positions that you believe are true, and you're in violation of one of them. You can't have both to be true.
It's the law of identity.
It's almost like they want gravity to be the cause and the effect. Remember, when I asked him what's the name of the force that gravity creates, because when I asked him, are you thinking of gravity as a force? And he said, I don't need to think of it as a force because it creates a force. And then I asked him, well, what's the force that gravity creates? That's when he said the emergent force. So they want gravity to be the cause and the effect at the same time.
Correct.
And just be able to switch back and forth to whatever they want.
Yeah, that's a law of identity.
If they're already switching up colloquial interpretations and physics interpretation, why don't they just call it a force consideration then?
It's a law. Let's just get this in once. It's a law of identity violation.
I have a question for Nathan.
I just want to get in because Anthony said it's a violation of the law of non-contradiction, which is true in phraseology, but it's an identity violation. So you can't be A and not A at the same time. You can't be a force or a cause and an effect simultaneously in the same example. So it's a law of identity violation.
Brian, before you go,
if they just consider it, then it's not literally
a
force. They just take it as a force.
Yeah, I bet you love that, Arwin?
Oh, they'll love it too.
Before Brian goes, I like to say there's no such thing as an uncaused effect.
Yeah, that's called theoretical physics.
Go on, Brian.
The question I have is for Nathan. It's not really a question for Nathan. I'm just looking for Nathan to answer because Nathan is the boss of the show. Nathan, would this emergent entropic force be possible without entropy?
I think they're hijacking a second order effect of entropy. So to assert that it exists in the first place, but it requires entropy as a cause of this non-force force that you can think of as a force that's described as an emergent force, when the cause of the non-force is the force causing it to be a force. I can't use that and then say, well, when they're hijacking a second order effect, it'd be like asking me, if you've got perspective, how would you have perspective in the geometry of Earth curve maths? Well, you can't. It's hijacking it.
We've got Rumpus in chat now saying that all forces are effects.
1 second. Is that a yes or a no then?
I'd say it's a no.
So it wouldn't be possible without entropy.
Correct. Their description would be a description
would it be
of
possible
an entropic
without
effect.
gravity?
Yeah, their description is a description of an entropic effect, which they've hijacked and called gravity. So if you want to phrase it in such a way that you'd say, well, they couldn't have this description of their not actual force without a second order effect of entropy, then I'd agree with you.
That is the exact reason why helium balloons rise, because it's the description of an entropic force.
Yeah, well, the reason I was asking was that what I was hoping would happen would be, I say, is this emergent force possible without entropy? And the answer would just be no. Is it possible without gravity? And the answer would be yes. That's the end of that.
And whilst let me just get Rumpus while he's in chat. How many times have we heard Rumpus saying that mass is not a force, weight is a force, because weight is measured in newtons, and because it's expressed in newtons, that is thought of and considered to be a force in physics. So if we accept what he says, that mass is not a force, it is a value, it's a quantification, a scale of anything. It can be numbers, just number. It's just a quantification of something, right? Mass in itself is not a force. Only weight is because it's measured in newtons. Yet he'll then counter-argue with you that mass attracts mass. Well, if mass isn't a force, so let's just say 6 is the mass of something, right? How can 6 attract the other 6 that happens to be nearby. It can't. It's just numbers. It's a quantification or a measure.
Generates a force. Mass generates a force. It causes a force, and the gravitational force is an effect. So
Right,
try that
you're in
again.
violation
The
of
mass
your own
is
law.
the let me finish. The mass is the cause of the force, and the force, the gravitational force, is an effect. Finished.
No, you're conflating
How
the
is
two.
mass a cause?
You don't understand that forces are all effects. They are caused by
Rumpus,
something.
how is
They
the
are
mass?
Effects.
How is mass
Rumpus
a
has to
cause?
define weight.
Everyone shut up.
Rumpus define
Hello,
weight.
hello, Brian.
Forces
Brian,
are
hello.
Effects.
Just
All
Rumpus.
forces are effects.
Rumpus,
Thank you.
please,
No,
can you not parrot the
forces are
same thing
defined.
5 times?
Yeah, well, I'm
Said.
being interrupted. I wasn't able to get my word out.
Okay, you've got them out
Rumpus, can
now.
I have
Thank
a
you.
citation for
Yeah, I've
all
got them out now.
forces?
Get
are
them
effects,
out.
please?
Go ahead, Anthony.
Nonsense.
Can we have a citation for all forces are effects, please? Where have you got that from?
Well, they're caused by things, and therefore they're an effect.
Nobody asked.
So, for
Yeah,
instance,
can I
the
have a
gravitational
citation?
force is
Nobody
caused by
asked.
mass.
He asked for a citation.
Where
Well, I
have you
haven't
got it
got
from?
one to hand. No.
Oh, well, then shut up. Shout out to Retro Bill. It says,
in that case,
absolutely
we'll apply
brilliant
Hitchens
conversations
rating
over the
22.
past 2 days. Thank you, guys. Really appreciate your support. Thank you very much for the super chat, Retro
Ridiculous
Bill.
point of view. Ridiculous.
Rumpus, if you haven't got a supporting citation, right, that's fine, but come back with one
Well, it's
because
basic
until you
logic.
do, we're going to dismiss
Okay,
it with
I can do
Hitchens
that.
waiver.
He's talking through Anthony that's pointing out that he doesn't have anything to back his claim. But of course, Rumpus, being a fundamentalist religious zealot, is going to use the mute button. Oh, yeah, I've got a mute button too. Feel free to hold it against me while Rumpus talks through every single word of Anthony pointing out that he can't back his claim.
And therefore they're effects.
See, he didn't listen. He just made his example again, not citing it. Anthony, feel free to obliterate Rumpus while he talks through every word of it. I'll shut him up. Feel free to moan in the comments that I'm shutting down the fundy from preventing Anthony saying what he's about to say.
Okay, so Rumpus's position is that all forces are effects. Now, I've asked him for a citation to support that, not even that it's true, just a supporting bit of citation that leans people to think that he's not just speaking out of his arse. Because then when we have that, then we can have a conversation. But until he gives us something that we can critically discuss, it's simply making an assertion that he can't quantify or substantiate. But then Hitchens' razor applies. So assertions without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. That's why we want to know why he thinks that forces can be conflated with effects.
Another quick shout out to Dave Recky Gafford. Thank you very much indeed for the super chat. It says, and the hits keep coming. Good job, panel. Thank you very much indeed for the super chat. Really appreciate your support. And with that, I'm going to say, if you are watching this on either Nathan Oakley 1980 or Nathan Oakley... Oh, I've frozen up on my camera. Well, that's a good thing, isn't it? Happy days. If you're watching this on either Nathan Oakley 1980 or Nathan Oakley Premiering streams, then stay tuned, as there will be an after show to follow. Unfortunately, if you are watching this live, this is where we bid you farewell. Massive thanks to all who smashed the super chat, liked, commented, shared, subscribed, and all that good stuff. Once again, stay tuned if you are watching on either Premiering stream. I've been Nathan Oakley, and I'll see you all in the next video.
Oh, what a day! What a lovely day!